On the evening of October 12th, 1984, a 38-year-old electrical engineer named David Morrison sat in the basement of his split-level house in Arlington Heights, Illinois, sorting through a cardboard box of old photographs he had discovered behind a false panel in the water heater closet. His wife of 11 years, Katherine Morrison, was upstairs preparing dinner. Their two children, Jennifer, age 9, and Michael, age 7, were watching television in the living room. David had found the box approximately 20 minutes earlier while investigating what he believed to be a minor plumbing issue. What he discovered inside that box would lead to the exposure of one of the most sophisticated Soviet deep-cover operations ever conducted on American soil and would destroy everything he believed about the woman he had married. David Morrison had met Katherine Brenner in the spring of 1973 at a graduate student mixer at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. He was completing his master's degree in electrical engineering. She was finishing her undergraduate degree in library science, having transferred to Northwestern from a small college in Wisconsin 2 years earlier. Their courtship had been unremarkable in its normalcy. They dated for 6 months before Katherine invited him to meet her parents, who lived in what she described as a small town in northern Wisconsin, near the Michigan border. Her father, she explained, was a retired insurance adjuster. Her mother had worked as a secretary before staying home to raise Katherine and her younger brother, who was serving in the Army. They were married in August 1973 in a small ceremony at a Presbyterian church in Evanston. Katherine's parents attended, along with David's mother and father, who had driven up from Springfield, Illinois. David's parents liked Katherine immediately, describing her to relatives as polite, intelligent, and appropriately reserved. After the wedding, David accepted a position with Motorola in the Chicago area working on communications systems development. Katherine found work as a librarian at a suburban public library. They rented an apartment in Arlington Heights, a middle-class suburb northwest of Chicago. Their daughter Jennifer was born in November 1975, followed by their son Michael in February 1977. By this time, David had been promoted twice at Motorola and was working on projects that required a secret-level security clearance, primarily involving radio communications systems for military applications. The background check conducted for his clearance had been routine and had revealed nothing unusual. In 1981, they purchased the split-level house in Arlington Heights, where they still lived. It was a modest 3-bedroom home with a small yard located on a quiet street where children played and neighbors maintained friendly but not intrusive relationships. Katherine Morrison was an exemplary wife and mother. She volunteered at her children's school, attended PTA, meetings, and maintained the household with efficiency and care. She prepared meals, managed the family budget, and maintained a small garden in the backyard. David's colleagues at Motorola described the Morrisons as a typical suburban couple. David's mother said that Katherine was exactly the kind of daughter-in-law she had hoped her son would find. The first indication that something might be wrong had occurred approximately 3 weeks before David found the hidden box. On the evening of September 19, 1984, David had arrived home from work to find Katherine on the telephone in the kitchen, speaking in what sounded like a foreign language. When she noticed him entering through the garage door, she had quickly concluded the conversation. David asked who had called. Katherine explained that it was a wrong number, someone looking for a Russian family that must have previously had their phone number. The person had spoken to her in Russian, she said, and she had told them in the few words of Russian she remembered from a college course that they had the wrong number. David had accepted this explanation without question. The incident might have been forgotten entirely, except that something about Katherine's demeanor when she hung up the phone had seemed odd. She had appeared flustered in a way that was uncharacteristic of her normally composed manner. Over the following 3 weeks, David found himself paying more attention to small details of Katherine's behavior. He noticed that she seemed to maintain a rigid routine regarding when she checked the mail each day, always retrieving it at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. He observed that she took walks through the neighborhood several evenings each week, usually around 8 p.m. after the children's bedtime. He noticed that Katherine kept certain personal papers in a locked metal file box in her closet. David felt ashamed of these suspicions, that he had tried to dismiss them as irrational paranoia possibly brought on by work stress. His current project at Motorola involved secure communication systems, and the security briefings he attended regularly emphasized Soviet efforts to penetrate American defense contractors. Nevertheless, the doubts persisted. On October 8, 1984, David had taken a half-day off work and returned home in the early afternoon, parking his car 2 streets away and approaching his house from the rear. From a position behind the garage, David watched his house for approximately 45 minutes. At exactly 3:30 p.m., Katherine emerged from the front door, walked to the mailbox, and retrieved the mail. She then walked to a small neighborhood park at the end of the street. Katherine sat on a bench for approximately 10 minutes, appearing to read through the mail. A man David did not recognize, appearing to be in his 50s with gray hair and wearing a dark coat, walked past the bench where Katherine sat. The man did not appear to speak to Katherine or acknowledge her. Presence. Katherine remained on the bench for another 5 minutes after the man passed, then walked back to the house. David had been uncertain what, if anything, this observation proved. Still, something about the precise timing and Katherine's deliberate pause after the man's passage had seemed choreographed in a way that disturbed him. On October 12, 1984, David returned home from work to find a note from Katherine explaining that she had taken the children to their Friday afternoon activities. She would return around 6:30 p.m. and had left a casserole in the refrigerator. David decided to use the unexpected time alone to address a persistent issue with the hot water heater, which had been making unusual noises for several days. The basement was typical of suburban homes built in the early 1970s, partially finished with a carpeted recreation area and a separate utility area with concrete floors. The water heater stood against the back wall, enclosed on 3 sides by a wooden frame. While examining the temperature dial, David noticed that one of the wooden panels appeared to be loose at the bottom. He pulled on it gently, and the entire panel came away, revealing a shallow space between the water heater and the wall. Inside this space, pushed back against the cinder block wall, was a cardboard box approximately 12 inches square and 8 inches deep, sealed with yellowed packing tape. David carried the box to the workbench and opened it using a utility knife. Inside, he found approximately 35 to 40 photographs, most of them faded color prints from the 1960s and early 1970s. The photographs showed a young girl at various ages, from approximately 5 years old through her middle teenage years. David recognized the girl immediately as Katherine, though she appeared younger than any pictures he had seen before. What disturbed David about the photographs was their locations and context. Several photos showed the young Katherine in what appeared to be an institutional setting, sitting at a desk in a classroom with other children visible in the background, all engaged in study. The signs visible on the walls in these classroom photos were in Cyrillic script. Other photographs showed Katherine, perhaps age 12 or 13, engaged in physical training activities, running through an obstacle course, climbing ropes, performing exercises. Still other photos showed her slightly older, perhaps 15 or 16, sitting with adults who appeared to be instructors, poring over documents spread on a table. One photograph in particular caught David's attention. It showed Katherine at approximately age 16, standing with a group of other teenagers, both boys and girls, all dressed in similar clothing. They were positioned in front of a large building with distinctive architecture. David would later learn from FBI analysts that it was the Dynamo Sports Complex in Moscow, a facility known to have been used by Soviet intelligence agencies for training purposes. Beneath the photographs, David found several documents. Some were in Russian, which he could not read. Others were in English. One document appeared to be a birth certificate for Katherine Brenner, issued by the county clerk's office in Eagle River, Wisconsin, dated July 18, 1955. Another document was a high school transcript for Katherine Brenner from Eagle River High School, showing grades for courses completed between 1969 and 1973. A third document was a Social Security card in the name of Katherine Ann Brenner. At the bottom of the box, David found a small notebook with a dark blue cover. The notebook contained handwriting in Russian that covered approximately 40 pages. On the final page, there was writing in English. It said, Katherine Ann Brenner, born Eagle River, Wisconsin, July 18, 1955. Parents John Brenner and Elizabeth Brenner. Brother Robert Brenner, born 1958. Attended Eagle River Schools, graduated 1973. Transferred to Northwestern University 1971. Parents divorced 1968, mother retained custody. Father remarried. 1970 moved to California. Mother remarried 1972 to Robert Jensen, changed name to Elizabeth Jensen, kept Brenner for children. David read and reread this final page multiple times. The biographical information matched what Katherine had told him about her childhood and family, but the fact that it was written out in such detail, in English at the end of a notebook otherwise filled with Russian text, suggested something deeply disturbing. It read like instructions, like a script that someone was supposed to memorize and follow. David Morrison sat in his basement for approximately 30 minutes, trying to find an innocent explanation for what he had discovered. None of these explanations adequately accounted for why this box had been hidden behind a false panel in their basement. At approximately 6:25 p.m., David heard the garage door opening. He quickly placed all the materials back into the box, closed it, and carried it upstairs to his home office. He placed the box in his desk drawer and locked it. When he came downstairs, Katherine and the children were in the kitchen. Jennifer was describing her piano lesson. Michael was still wearing his soccer uniform. Katherine was warming the casserole in the oven. David joined them at the kitchen table, trying to maintain normal conversation while his mind raced through possibilities. That evening, after dinner and after the children had been put to bed, David told Katherine that he needed to visit his parents in Springfield the following day for a family matter that had come up unexpectedly. This was a lie. He told Katherine that he would leave early in the morning and return Sunday afternoon. Katherine accepted this explanation and went to bed around 10:20 p.m. David stayed awake in the living room, thinking about what he should do. By the early morning hours of October 13, 1984, David had decided that he needed to report what he had found to the FBI. The photographs and documents suggested something connected to Soviet intelligence. He also recognized that his secret-level clearance at Motorola and his work on military communication systems meant that this situation posed potential security concerns that he was obligated to report. At approximately 7:15 a.m. on October 13th, David left the house as planned. He drove to the FBI's Chicago field office, located in the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago. The office was closed on Saturday morning with only a skeleton staff present. David explained to the duty agent that he needed to report a possible security matter related to his defense work. The duty agent made several phone calls. Within 40 minutes, 2 additional agents had arrived. One of them, Special Agent Robert Keating, would become the lead investigator on what would eventually be designated as Operation False Wife. David spent approximately 4 hours that Saturday morning at the FBI office providing a detailed account of his marriage to Katherine, the suspicious behaviors he had observed, the hidden box he had discovered, and his concerns about security given his defense contractor work. He had brought the box with him. The FBI agents examined the contents carefully, taking particular interest in the photographs showing Katherine at what appeared to be Soviet training facilities and the notebook with its biographical details written in English. Agent Keating asked David numerous questions about Katherine's family, her background, her behaviors during their marriage, her friends and social contacts, her daily routines. David provided what information he could, acknowledging that he had never met Katherine's father, who she said had moved to California after divorcing her mother and with whom she claimed to have lost contact. He had met her mother only once, during that brief visit in 1973 before their marriage. The FBI agents explained that they would need to investigate the materials he had provided and verify certain information before determining what action should be taken. They asked whether Katherine knew that David had found the box. David confirmed that she did not. The agents instructed David to return home, to behave normally, and to avoid doing anything that might alert Katherine to his suspicions or to the FBI's interest. They asked David whether he would be willing to cooperate with an investigation if one proved necessary. David agreed, though he expressed concern about his children and what this might mean for their family. Agent Keating had been frank with David about the implications of what he had found. If Katherine Morrison was indeed a Soviet illegal, a deep-cover agent operating under a false identity, then their entire marriage had been a lie from the beginning. David left the FBI office around noon and drove aimlessly around Chicago for several hours, eventually stopping at a payphone to call his own home and tell Katherine that everything was fine at his parents' house. He spent Saturday night at a Holiday Inn near O'Hare Airport, unable to sleep. The FBI's investigation into Katherine Morrison began immediately. On Sunday, October 14th, while David was driving back to Arlington Heights, FBI agents were conducting database searches and making phone inquiries to verify basic facts about Katherine's supposed background. What they discovered confirmed David's worst fears. Katherine Ann Brenner had indeed been born on July 18, 1955, in Eagle River, Wisconsin, to John and Elizabeth Brenner. However, Katherine Ann Brenner had died on October 3, 1955, at the age of 2.5 months from sudden infant death syndrome. A death certificate existed in Wisconsin state records. The infant had been buried in Eagle River Cemetery. The real John and Elizabeth Brenner had divorced in 1962. John Brenner had died in a traffic accident in 1967. Elizabeth Brenner had remarried in 1964 to a man named Thomas Walsh. Elizabeth Brenner Walsh was alive and living in Eagle River in October 1984. FBI agents interviewed her on October 16th. Mrs. Walsh confirmed that she had given birth to one child, Katherine Ann, who had died in infancy, and that she had never had any other children. She had never heard of David Morrison or of anyone claiming to be her daughter. The woman David Morrison had married in 1973 was not Katherine Brenner. She had assumed the identity of a dead infant, a tactic the FBI recognized as common among Soviet illegals who needed authentic American birth certificates and Social Security numbers. Soviet intelligence agencies maintained extensive files of American children who had died in infancy before they would have created substantial documentation. These identities could be appropriated by agents who would then use the legitimate birth certificates to obtain the documents needed to function as American citizens. The high school transcript from Eagle River High School was a forgery. No student named Katherine Brenner had attended Eagle River High School during the years indicated. Northwestern University records showed that a Katherine Brenner had indeed transferred to the school in 1971 and had graduated in 1973. However, the admission records showed that her transfer application had included transcripts from a small women's college in Wisconsin called Lakefield College. FBI agents learned that the school had closed in 1975 due to financial difficulties, and most student records had been lost or destroyed. The FBI analysis suggested a carefully constructed legend. The woman had likely entered the United States in late 1970 or early 1971, possibly through Canada, with a birth certificate obtained through Soviet intelligence research. She had manufactured a background at Lakefield College, choosing that school specifically because it was small and likely to close, making verification difficult. The transfer to Northwestern provided credibility. The genuine Northwestern degree gave her legitimate credentials that would pass standard employment verification. On October 18, 1984, FBI Director William Webster was briefed on Operation False Wife. The case was considered highly sensitive given that Katherine Morrison had been married to an engineer with security clearance working on military communications systems. The FBI launched full surveillance on Katherine Morrison beginning October 19, 1984. A team of agents was assigned to follow her daily activities and attempt to identify any meeting patterns or communication methods she might be using to contact Soviet handlers. The FBI also initiated technical surveillance of the Morrison home, installing listening devices under FISA warrants. David Morrison was briefed on the surveillance operation on October 20th. FBI agents explained that they needed time to observe Katherine's activities and gather evidence that could be used in any eventual prosecution. David was instructed to continue his normal routine and to report any unusual activities to his FBI contact. David struggled profoundly with the requirement to live normally with a woman he now knew to be operating under a false identity. He went to work each day. He came home to dinner with his wife and children. He slept in the same bed as Katherine. He maintained conversations about household matters. All the while, he knew that FBI agents were listening to every word and that Katherine was being followed. The surveillance of Katherine Morrison lasted for 6 weeks. During this period, the FBI observed several behaviors that confirmed their suspicion that Katherine was an active Soviet agent. On October 23rd, Katherine had taken one of her regular evening walks. FBI surveillance agents followed her through the neighborhood. At one point, she paused beside a large oak tree in a small public park. She appeared to reach behind the tree, then continued walking. Agents searched the area and found a hollow in the tree that contained a small metal container. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a series of numbers, possibly a coded message. The FBI photographed the paper, replaced it, and maintained surveillance. 2 days later, the metal container was retrieved from the tree hollow by a man appearing to be in his late 50s with gray hair. He paused briefly as if to tie his shoe and retrieved the container. FBI agents followed this man to a parking lot where he got into a car with diplomatic license plates registered to the Soviet consulate in Chicago. The FBI identified the man as Dmitry Volkov, officially listed as a cultural affairs officer but believed to be a KGB officer operating under diplomatic cover. This observation confirmed that Katherine Morrison was actively servicing a dead drop and communicating with Soviet intelligence handlers. The FBI documented several additional dead drop exchanges over the following weeks at various locations around suburban Chicago. On November 14, 1984, Katherine drove to downtown Chicago, telling David that she needed to purchase materials for the library. FBI agents followed her to the Art Institute of Chicago, She entered the museum and spent approximately 90 minutes moving through various galleries. At one point, she sat on a bench in the European Paintings Gallery. While she was seated, Dmitry Volkov entered the same gallery and sat on the opposite end of the same bench. Neither Katherine nor Volkov acknowledged each other overtly. Volkov placed a folded newspaper on the bench between them. After approximately 5 minutes, Volkov stood and left. Several minutes later, Katherine picked up the newspaper, folded it into her shoulder bag, and continued viewing paintings. The Art Institute meeting represented clear tradecraft consistent with a brush pass, where materials are transferred between an agent and a handler in a crowded public location. According to FBI recordings, Katherine had asked David whether something was wrong, noting that he seemed distant. David had replied that work stress was affecting him. Katherine had suggested that perhaps they should take a family vacation during Thanksgiving, maybe drive to Wisconsin. This conversation had struck David as particularly cruel, given that Katherine was proposing a trip to the very state where the real Katherine Brenner had been born and was buried. The most disturbing aspect for David had been watching Katherine interact with their children. Jennifer and Michael adored their mother. She helped them with homework, packed their school lunches, attended their activities, read to them before bed. Every maternal behavior appeared genuine. David found himself wondering constantly whether Katherine felt any authentic affection for these children or whether motherhood was simply part of her assignment. On November 28, 1984, FBI agents observed Katherine making a series of phone calls from various payphones. The FBI determined that these calls were being placed to a number corresponding to a phone booth in downtown Chicago, suggesting Katherine was communicating with her handlers through a prearranged signal system. FBI leadership decided that the surveillance operation had gathered sufficient evidence. On November 30, 1984, a federal warrant was obtained charging Katherine Morrison, whose true name was unknown, with conspiracy to commit espionage and acting as an unregistered agent of a foreign government. The arrest was scheduled for the morning of December 1st. On the evening of November 30th, David Morrison was briefed about the planned arrest. He was informed that Katherine would be taken into custody the following morning and that he would need to make arrangements for his children. David asked what he should tell Jennifer and Michael. The FBI agents suggested that David might want to tell them initially that their mother needed to go away for a while and that fuller explanations could come later. David spent that final evening with Katherine, and the children in a state of nearly unbearable tension. They ate dinner together. Katherine helped the children with homework. They watched a television program. At approximately 8:30 p.m., Katherine announced she was going for her usual walk. David experienced a moment of panic, wondering whether Katherine had somehow detected the investigation. She returned 45 minutes later, as usual, and the evening concluded with normal bedtime routines. At approximately 6:15 a.m. on December 1st, 1984, FBI agents entered the Morrison home with the arrest warrant. David had already left for work as instructed. Jennifer and Michael were still asleep. Katherine was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when agents knocked on the door. When she was informed that she was being arrested for espionage-related charges, Katherine reportedly went silent, her expression becoming neutral and emotionless. Katherine was handcuffed and taken into FBI custody. The agents read her Miranda rights. She made no statement. FBI evidence teams searched the Morrison home for the next 8 hours. In Katherine's locked metal file box, agents found additional documents written in Russian, including what appeared to be coded communications. In the basement, behind insulation in the crawl space, agents discovered a shortwave radio capable of receiving encrypted transmissions. Jennifer Morrison, age 9, and Michael Morrison, age 7, were woken by FBI agents that morning and placed temporarily in the care of a neighbor. David Morrison received a phone call at work informing him that his wife had been arrested and that he needed to return home. David experienced an overwhelming mixture of relief, grief, and fear as he drove home, knowing that his family's life as they had known it had ended. Katherine Morrison, whose true identity remained unknown, was taken to the FBI field office and placed in a holding cell. She refused to answer questions during initial interrogation. FBI translators attempted to speak with her in Russian, but she maintained her silence. She was arraigned in federal court on December 3, 1984, charged with conspiracy to commit espionage and acting as an unregistered foreign agent. A federal public defender was appointed to represent her. Over the following weeks, FBI investigators worked to determine Katherine's true identity. Eventually, a breakthrough came through comparison of the childhood photographs found in the hidden box with KGB training facility records that had been provided to Western intelligence by a Soviet defector. The FBI determined with reasonable confidence that the woman calling herself Katherine Morrison had been born in the Soviet Union, probably in the mid-1950s, and had been enrolled in a special KGB training school for children at approximately age 5 or 6. These schools selected children who showed aptitude for language, acting, and intelligence work, and trained them from childhood to eventually assume deep-cover identities in Western countries. The training regimen involved complete immersion in English language and American culture from an early age. Children were taught American history, geography, customs, and idioms. They learned to think and behave as Americans. The goal was to produce agents who could live for years in America, building authentic-seeming lives while gathering intelligence. The woman who had become Katherine Morrison had likely completed her training in the late 1960s or early 1970s. She had been infiltrated into the United States probably around 1970 or 1971, at approximately age 15 or 16, with the identity documents of the deceased Catherine Brenner. She had spent 2 years establishing her background at the fictitious Lakefield College before transferring to Northwestern, where her successful completion of a legitimate degree had solidified her legend. Meeting and marrying David Morrison, an electrical engineer who would soon be working on defense-related projects, may have been opportunistic rather than planned. Katherine Morrison had lived as an illegal agent for approximately 13 years, from roughly 1971 to 1984. She had successfully maintained her cover throughout college, through courtship and marriage, through pregnancy and motherhood. She had worked at a public library while raising 2 children and servicing dead drops for Soviet intelligence. In January 1985, facing overwhelming evidence, Katherine Morrison agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Through her attorney, she acknowledged that she was a Soviet illegal, though she refused to provide her true name, saying only that she had been given the designation Irina during her training. She confirmed that she had been trained from childhood at a KGB facility, that she had been sent to America in 1971, and that she had been tasked with establishing a normal life and waiting for potential future activation. Katherine told FBI interrogators that she had married David Morrison because he seemed like a suitable partner who would provide stability and cover. She claimed that her choice of David had not been directed by her Soviet handlers, but had been her own decision, made with the understanding that marrying an engineer might eventually prove useful. She acknowledged that she had provided information to her handlers about David's work at Motorola, though she maintained that this information was limited to general details David had mentioned in casual conversation. Regarding her children, Katherine told investigators that she had not wanted to have children, that becoming pregnant had not been part of her original plan, but that refusing to have children would have seemed unusual and might have drawn attention. She acknowledged that she had raised Jennifer and Michael, and had performed all expected maternal duties, but she refused to discuss whether she felt any emotional attachment to them. When FBI interrogators pressed this question, she reportedly said only that she had fulfilled her responsibilities as their mother and that what she felt was irrelevant to the investigation. This statement about her children would prove particularly devastating to David Morrison. The possibility that Katherine had viewed their children merely as props in her cover story became one of the most painful aspects of the entire experience. Nevertheless, FBI agents who had observed Katherine with Jennifer and Michael before her arrest noted that her behavior toward them had appeared genuinely affectionate. In February 1985, Katherine Morrison pleaded guilty in federal court to charges of acting as an unregistered agent of a foreign government. In exchange for her cooperation, prosecutors recommended a sentence of 18 years in federal prison. The judge accepted this recommendation, and Katherine was sentenced on March 15, 1985, to 18 years at a federal women's correctional facility in Alderson, West Virginia. At the sentencing hearing, Katherine's attorney asked permission for her to make a brief statement. Katherine stood and addressed the court in a clear, steady voice, saying that she apologized for violating American laws and for the deception she had practiced. She did not apologize to David Morrison or mention her children. David attended the sentencing hearing and later said that listening to Katherine speak in that flat, impersonal tone confirmed for him that the woman he had married had never truly existed. The question of what to tell Jennifer and Michael Morrison had become the central challenge for David in the months following Katherine's arrest. Initially, David had told them that their mother had to go away for a while. As weeks passed, and the children asked repeatedly when their mother would return, David was forced to provide more information. In late December 1984, David told Jennifer and Michael that their mother had been arrested because she had done something illegal and that she would be in prison for a long time. Jennifer, then 9 years old, had asked what her mother had done. David had struggled to explain espionage in terms a child could understand. He eventually told them that their mother had been keeping secrets and sharing information with people she shouldn't have, and that this was against the law. Michael, then 7, had asked if their mother was a bad person. David had no adequate answer. He told them that people sometimes do things that are wrong, but that doesn't mean they don't love their children. This was a lie David told for his children's benefit, as he had no knowledge of whether Katherine loved them or not. During the months following Katherine's arrest, David Morrison sought therapy for himself and for his children. In April 1985, David received a letter from Katherine through her attorney. Katherine wrote that she understood if David wanted to divorce her and never speak to her again. She also wrote that if David believed it would be helpful for Jennifer and Michael, she would be willing to maintain limited contact with them through letters. David struggled with this question for several weeks. Eventually, he filed for divorce in May 1985. The divorce was granted uncontested in July 1985. David was awarded full custody of Jennifer and Michael. Regarding contact with the children, David decided that he would allow Katherine to send birthday cards, with the understanding that all correspondence would be reviewed first. Katherine sent birthday cards to both children starting in 1985. The cards were brief, expressing hope that they were doing well. They were signed Mother. Neither Jennifer nor Michael responded to these cards during the first years. The psychological impact on Jennifer and Michael Morrison became evident over the following years. Jennifer, who had been 9 when her mother was arrested, developed anxiety and difficulty trusting people. She struggled academically during middle school despite having been a good student previously. Michael, who had been 7, showed signs of depression and asked repeatedly whether his father was also lying to him, whether their family was real or fake. David arranged for both children to see therapists regularly. He moved the family to a different suburb in 1986, seeking a fresh start. He changed jobs, leaving Motorola and taking a position with a smaller electronics firm where his security clearance was not required. He tried to create as normal a life as possible for Jennifer and Michael, but the damage was profound and lasting. Jennifer Morrison, interviewed years later by a journalist, stated that she had spent her entire adolescence wondering what was real and what had been fake about her childhood. She had vivid memories of her mother reading to her before bed, helping her learn to ride a bicycle, baking cookies together. She remembered feeling safe and loved. Learning that her mother had been a Soviet spy had required her to re-examine every memory. Michael Morrison said that he had eventually concluded that it didn't matter whether his mother had felt authentic affection for him or not, because the result was the same either way. She had left him. She had chosen her allegiance to a foreign intelligence service over her relationship with her children. David Morrison never remarried. He explained in later interviews that after Katherine's betrayal, he found it impossible to trust intimately again. He dated occasionally, but never formed any lasting relationships. His primary focus remained on raising Jennifer and Michael. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Russian intelligence services began releasing limited information about former operations. The FBI approached Russian intelligence through liaison channels and inquired about the agent who had operated under the name Katherine Morrison. Russian intelligence confirmed that the woman had been part of the illegals program and had been trained from childhood. They provided a true name: Ekaterina Vladimirovna Sokolova, born in Moscow in 1954, selected for the special training program at age 6 based on language aptitude and psychological profile assessments. Russian intelligence indicated that Sokolova's mission had been considered successful until her compromise in 1984, and that her intelligence reports had been valued primarily for providing insights into American suburban middle-class life and culture, which helped Soviet handlers better understand and direct other illegals. This revelation added another layer of bitter irony to David's experience. His marriage, his family life, his children's childhood had all been exploited not necessarily for military secrets, but as a kind of anthropological study of American normalcy. Ekaterina Sokolova, still known publicly as Katherine Morrison, served 14 years of her 18-year sentence. She was released from federal prison in September 1999 at age 45, with time off for good behavior. Upon her release, she was deported to Russia. FBI officials noted that she had no visitors during her final years in prison and that she boarded her deportation flight alone, carrying a single suitcase. Jennifer Morrison was 24 years old when her mother was deported. She had graduated from college with a degree in psychology and was working at a community mental health center near Chicago. She did not attend her mother's deportation and made no attempt to contact her. Michael Morrison was 22, finishing his undergraduate degree in computer science. He likewise made no effort to see his mother before her departure. David Morrison learned of Katherine's release and deportation through official notification from the FBI. He informed Jennifer and Michael, but none of them expressed interest in knowing where in Russia Katherine had gone. For them, she had already been gone for 15 years. Her physical departure from the United States changed nothing. In 2003, a Russian journalist published an article in a Moscow magazine about former KGB illegals and their difficulties readjusting to Russian life. The article included a brief interview with a woman identified only as Ekaterina S., who had lived in America for 13 years under deep cover before being arrested in the mid-1980s. The woman, then approximately 49 years old, worked as an English language instructor in Moscow and lived alone. When asked about her years in America, Ekaterina S. reportedly said that she remembered that period as if it had happened to someone else. She said that she had been trained so thoroughly to become an American that returning to Russia had felt like arriving in a foreign country. She spoke English more fluently than Russian. When the journalist asked whether she ever thought about the family she had left in America, Ekaterina had been silent for several moments before saying that she preferred not to discuss that aspect of her past. When pressed, she said only that the children would be adults now and that she hoped they had good lives. The journalist's article eventually reached David Morrison through a historian writing about illegals programs. David read the article but declined to participate in the book. He did show the article to Jennifer and Michael, who were by then in their late 20s. Jennifer said that reading about her mother's difficulty readjusting to Russia had given her a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with sadness. Her mother had essentially lost her entire life, having been so thoroughly transformed into someone else that she could never fully be either person. Michael said that the article had made him realize that his mother had been as much a victim of the system that created her as he and Jennifer had been victims of her deception. She had been 6 years old when she was taken and enrolled in a training program that would strip away her original identity. This recognition of shared victimhood did not, however, translate into any desire for reconciliation. Understanding the systemic nature of what had happened did not change the personal impact of his mother's choices. David Morrison was 58 years old when his former wife's interview appeared. Jennifer was 28, recently married, working as a therapist specializing in family trauma. Michael was 26, employed as a software engineer. They remained a close family, bound together by their shared experience and their collective effort to build meaningful lives despite it. In 2008, David Morrison suffered a heart attack. He survived but was advised to reduce stress. He retired fully in 2010 at age 64. Jennifer had her first child that same year, making David a grandfather. She named her daughter Sarah, carefully avoiding any names that might carry associations with her own mother. Michael attended the baby's christening and told Jennifer that watching her become a mother had made him think about what Katherine might have felt, if anything, looking at them as infants and knowing that her primary identity was as an intelligence asset rather than their parent. David Morrison died in January 2019 at age 73 from complications related to heart disease. Jennifer and Michael were with him during his final days. David had expressed that his greatest regret was not recognizing sooner that something was wrong with Katherine, that perhaps if he had been more observant, he might have discovered her deception earlier and spared Jennifer and Michael some years of pain. Jennifer and Michael had both assured their father that he bore no responsibility for what Katherine had done, that he had been as much a victim as anyone, and that the life he had built for them after Katherine's arrest had been marked by dedication, love, and sacrifice. These assurances appeared to give David some measure of peace. He died surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Following David's death, Jennifer and Michael discussed whether they should notify their mother that her former husband had died. After considerable debate, they decided against it. Katherine, or Ekaterina, had made no attempt to contact them during the 20 years since her deportation. She had sent no letters, made no inquiries about their well-being, shown no interest in whether she had grandchildren. As far as Jennifer and Michael were concerned, she had forfeited any claim to information about their lives. The question of whether Ekaterina Sokolova is still alive as of 2024 remains unanswered. She would be 70 years old if still living. No recent information about her whereabouts has emerged in public records. For all practical purposes, Ekaterina Sokolova disappeared from public view after that single 2003 interview. Jennifer Morrison, now 49 years old, has 3 children and continues to work as a therapist specializing in family trauma and trust issues. She has stated that her experience with her mother's deception informed her professional choice and shaped her understanding of how betrayal affects family systems. She has written several professional articles about the long-term impact of parental deception on child development, though she rarely mentions her personal experience directly. Michael Morrison, 47 years old, married in 2015 and has 2 children. He works in cybersecurity, a career choice he has stated was partly influenced by his experience with deception and hidden identities. In a 2022 interview, Michael said that discovering his mother's true identity had taught him that nothing can be taken at face value, that verification and skepticism are necessary tools for navigating a world where people are not always who they claim to be. Both Jennifer and Michael have stated that they have made peace with their history, though peace means acceptance rather than resolution. They understand that they will never have answers to many of their questions about their mother's motivations, feelings, or regrets. They have learned to live with ambiguity. The Morrison case remains one of the most extensively documented examples of a Soviet illegal operation in the United States during the Cold War. FBI case files have been partially declassified and are available to researchers. The case is frequently cited in intelligence studies as an example of the personal cost of deep-cover operations. Ekaterina Sokolova was 6 years old when she was taken into a training program that would shape every aspect of her identity. She was 15 or 16 when she was sent to America to begin building a false life. She was 18 when she married David Morrison. She was 21 when she gave birth to Jennifer. At the same time, Ekaterina made choices as an adult. She chose to maintain her cover after marrying David. She chose to have children as part of that cover. She chose to continue servicing dead drops, even as Jennifer and Michael grew old enough to remember her. David Morrison was 38 years old when he discovered the hidden box in his basement. He was 68 when he died. Between those years, he lost his wife, his sense of reality, his trust in his own judgment. He gained full responsibility for 2 traumatized children. He rebuilt his life through determination and love, but the shadow of Katherine's deception never fully lifted. Jennifer Morrison was 9 years old when FBI agents arrived to arrest her mother. She is 49 years old now. In between, she lost her sense of safety, her trust in maternal love, her confidence that people are who they claim to be. She built a career helping others navigate trauma while carrying her own unresolved grief. She created a family of her own, determined to be a mother whose love is genuine. Michael Morrison was 7 years old when his mother was arrested. He is 47 years old now. He spent his childhood wondering if his father was also lying, his adolescence trying to understand how his mother could abandon him, and his adult years learning to form relationships despite his foundational experience of betrayal. Soviet intelligence took a 6-year-old girl and transformed her into a weapon, stripping away her original identity and replacing it with carefully constructed lies. American counterintelligence used a husband's discovery to dismantle a family, monitoring private conversations in pursuit of prosecutorial success. Neither system accounted adequately for the human cost. Ekaterina Sokolova was 6 years old when someone decided her life would be dedicated to espionage. She was 45 when she was deported to a country that no longer existed in the form she had been trained to serve. And in between, she lost everything, including perhaps the capacity to know what, if anything, she had wanted for herself. The tragedy is not primarily that Soviet intelligence successfully infiltrated an illegal agent into American society. The tragedy is that this operation required the destruction of authentic human relationships, the weaponization of love and trust, and the creation of a situation where innocent children would spend their lives trying to understand whether their mother had ever loved them at all. And the greatest tragedy may be that even Ekaterina Sokolova herself likely doesn't know the answer to that question, having been so thoroughly trained to perform emotions that distinguishing performance from authenticity became impossible. David Morrison turned his wife over to the FBI because he believed it was his duty. He then spent the rest of his life wondering whether that decision had been an act of integrity or an act of betrayal. Both perspectives are true simultaneously. Jennifer and Michael Morrison grew up without their mother because a geopolitical conflict required that children be sacrificed when intelligence operations were compromised. And, somewhere in Russia, if she is still alive, Ekaterina Sokolova lives with memories of two lives. One she was born into and can barely remember, another she performed so convincingly that distinguishing it from reality became impossible. She has no family, no one who knew her before she became Katherine. She achieved the perfect cover, became so completely American that returning to her actual nationality felt like exile. And that achievement cost her everything that might have made life worth living.